Alright, so we're on to well, kind of the final hurdle. We're on to animation. So there's a couple of things to do before you start doing that. I mean, to be honest, you can do anything in any order really, as long as you've got your models ready. You can animate before you light, you can set your cameras up before you animate, you can set your cameras up after, it's really up to you. But I prefer setting everything up first and then going back and tweaking it later if I need to. So I've got my model here, I've got my light, I've got my camera. If I render it, don't think it's not too bad. Whoa, it's incredibly reflective and shiny. So let's just fix that. So I'm going to do materials, I'm going to go to my concrete here. And I'm going to put my reflections down to 0. I'm going to put my roughness up to, I don't know, 0.9. I think this stone, what? Why did you go to 1? No, I want 0.9. There. Yeah. Alright, so what does that look like now? Rendering the wrong viewport, but that looks fine. You can see there's no reflections, so that's cool. So what I want to do is I'm going to do a really simple animation of this gun lying on the ground, coming up, bouncing up and down a wee bit, spinning around like you walk past it in a game, and then it lying back down again. So nothing that spectacular. But to set it up, there's a few things I need to do. First of all, I like to put my camera and my lights and everything ready to go first. The second thing you probably want to do, I talked about the other day, if you're in the animation in queue as opposed to the games in animation, then that's your safe frame. So you don't need to do this, but if you go to views, viewport configuration, and then go to safe frames, show safe frames in active view, and what that does is it just shows you exactly what the camera is going to see. The class I had earlier today, I forgot to do this, and the gun was bouncing around outside the shot, which I don't want. So I'm just going to adjust my camera as well, like so. The next thing we want to do is adjust the timeline here, right? We've got it running from 0 to 100, right? By default, that is frames, right? You should know after discussing with me in the class today, or rather me telling you, there are, in Europe anyway, it's 24 or 25 frames a second. In America and other countries, it is closer to 30 frames a second. We're going to work in 25 because it's a wee bit easier. So you're going to be doing a 10 or 15 second animation depending on what class you're in. So you need to figure out how many frames that is. At the moment I've got 100 frames and it's 25 frames a second. So that's 100 divided by 25. That's 4 seconds of footage there. Clearly too short. So you're going to have to do a wee bit of calculation. However, so how many seconds you need, multiply that by how many frames, the frame rate, and you'll get how many frames you need. It's pretty obvious. So if I'm doing a 10-second animation, and it's 25 frames a second, I need 10 times 25, which is, of course, 3000. So I'm just going to go in and go to PAL, and then change that end time to 3000. It's actually 250. That was my hilarious joke. If you don't change that to PAL, it'll basically calculate it at 30 frames per second, or whatever you've got it set to custom. So change it to PAL, everything's tickety-boo. And there you go. So you see the timeline is now 0 to 250. So I know that that is the length of time that I need to fill with my stunning animation. So to animate is actually pretty straightforward. You're basically just going to move things around on the screen and Max will record them, and that's kind of it. So it uses keyframes, which you might be familiar with. I'll show you setting up some keyframes. So at the moment, if I do anything, it's not going to record anything, it's just going to move stuff around. I want to turn on auto key down here. And you see it goes all red around the border of whatever your active viewport is, and then along the timeline slider thing here. That means it's recording. Red is recording. It is very, 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 very easy to forget that you're recording, and you'll be in the middle of animating and you'll see a mistake somewhere and you'll just go and adjust it, and then you play back the video and then suddenly your models are moving in ways you don't want. I do it all the time. Hopefully you can be a bit more vigilant. Red is recording. If you're ever doing anything that's not animation, turn this off because you can end up doing some crazy weird things. So I'm going to start by putting my gun just in its starting position. So I want it lying on the ground. So I'm just going to rotate it around about 90 odd degrees. And then I'm just going to place it down on the ground about there. Like so. So that's the starting position. I then want it to take about 2 seconds to rise up. So that's 25 frames a second, 2 seconds, that's 50 frames. So I'm going to go to frame 50. And I'm just going to pull it up. And I'm going to rotate it around. And after I've done that, what you should see is that Max has drawn in 2 keyframes here, showing the position and rotation of the object relative to itself at that point in time. So at frame 0, it's lying down. At frame 50, it's up like that. And we're going to tween between the two. So between this keyframe and this keyframe, it's going to move the object so it goes from that position to that position, and it'll look like that. And that's essentially it. You're going through and you're putting keyframes in to make things move. So I'll just finish off this animation just now. I'm going to have it spin around on the spot a wee bit. I'm going to go to frame 75. I want it to take 1 second to do approximately a quarter turn. And then I want to go to 100 and do another quarter turn. And then I'm going to go to 125. And I'm going to do another quarter turn. And then I'm going to go to 150. And do another quarter turn. So now it's lying down, it goes up, it spins, 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 spins. So it's going to do that now. When I play it back, it's quite slow, but we can adjust that. It's going to go and it's going to spin. Now that's kind of dull. So I'm going to maybe have it bounce up and down a wee bit as well. I'm going to have it, as it gets to here, I'm going to have it go up a wee bit higher. So I'm going to go back. So I've got that keyframe highlighted. And anything you do to this object when that keyframe that's attached to the object is highlighted, means it will override it. So if I move that up, it's going to adjust it. If I'm slightly off, if I'm at frame 51, for example, hang on, let's go back. If I'm at frame 51, and then I move it up, it's added in another keyframe at 51. So between 50 and 51, it's going to jump up. Bong, 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 bong. So you want to make sure that you're on the right keyframe. You'll get to the point where you will have thousands, hundreds and hundreds of keyframes, hundreds and hundreds of frames. So at that point, you can go in and you can adjust the time configuration. The timeline goes on forever, and it actually goes back forever as well. So you can just show what bit you want to show, and then jump around it that way. But you won't really need to worry about that for another year or two at least. So I'm going to go in, and I'm going to have it move down a wee bit here. And then I'm going to have it move back up again. And I want you to notice here, that's green, right? That keyframe's just green because all it's doing is rotating. That's red and green because the position's changing as well as the rotation. So it's worth paying attention to that. I can't remember if I'm going up or down now. So I'm going down and then up and then I'm going back down again. And then I'm going to go back up again at frame. Well, I didn't finish rotating it, so I'm going to move it up again. I'm going to move it back round to where it began, roughly. So it's now going to come up quite slowly and then just spin, bouncing round. Very exciting. And then go back to the beginning. And then I want it to just lie down again. So I'm going to go from 150 to... take 2 seconds to go down. So I'm going to go from 150 to 200. And I'm literally just going to change that position. So it's now lying back where it was. Like so. So it's now going to go up, spinny, spinny, down. How lovely. Now, I've got 2 seconds of footage left at the end. So I need to think about how I'm going to fill that. Obviously, you know what you're going to do because you planned it all out ahead of time with your storyboards. It's perfectly fine if you need to change something, by the way. But what I'm going to do is just to tart it up is I'm going to animate the camera as well. So I want the camera to come in and look at that before it starts bouncing up and down. So I'm going to grab all these keyframes in the timeline. So you can just click and drag, highlight them all. They'll all turn white for the ones selected, and then you can just grab any of them and shift them all along on the timeline. So if you think anything's moving too slow, you can move the keyframes closer together to speed it up. If they're moving too fast, move the keyframes further apart to slow it down. That'll just kind of come with practice, I guess. So here I'm going to get my camera, and you'll see all the keyframes disappear because they're all linked to that object. If you had every keyframe of every object in your scene going at once, it would be insane. So the camera currently doesn't have any keyframes. I'm just going to move it to a starting position, like let's do there. And then I'm going to go up to frame 50. And I'm going to move it to its end position, which I want to be, let's do it there, like that. And now we play it back. Well, wrong viewport. Play that viewport back. So the camera moves along, the gun comes up, bounces around a wee bit, and then goes back down. So it's easier, I find, to do one object than do any other objects, rather than try and do, right, I'm going to have that move along to here, and then I'm going to have that bouncing up and down. Just do one object, and it's easy enough to go back and adjust anything you need to later. You're kind of blocking in the animation. For the purposes of what you guys are doing, this should be fairly straightforward, doing one object, moving, bouncing around, whatever you're doing. It gets a bit more complicated later on when you've got like a human body, and you're trying to get all the different parts to move as if they are one, but it just kind of comes with practice. For the meantime, play around with it, see what you can do. Just get something along the lines of this. That's going to bother me. I'm just going to change this because I don't like this black void in the background. So I'm just going to rotate that around like so. Whoopsie. Just so you can't see it. Move the camera up a wee bit. That's a bit better. Maybe I want to adjust it as well. So I'm going to go to frame 50, which is the final resting point of the camera. Camera, select the camera. And then I'm just going to adjust that so that's a bit more centered, I think. And then, lovely. So quick wee intro to animation. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's way more to it than this, but this is your basic premise. Is you've got keyframes, the objects are moving between the points on the keyframe on the timeline, going from position to position, known as pose to pose animation, if you want to know that. So there you go. There'll be more animation videos in future time, but for the time being, just get used to setting up the timeline, putting in your keyframes, making things bounce around a wee bit. If you get a couple of objects interacting with each other, you might try and animate that. And over the next few years, if you stick with us, you will learn more animation techniques. But for the time being, this is kind of all we're looking for. Okay, so enjoy, have fun, play around with it, see what you can do.